Part 2. She took her only daughter to her friend's wedding and saw her billionaire CEO ex, the daughter's father, marry the same friend. What happens next will leave you breathless. If this is your first time here, you may watch Part 1 first. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty crown every woman with unshakable dignity, radiant grace, and a heart overflowing with divine light. May He uplift the mothers who sacrifice, the sisters who inspire, the wives who walk in loyalty, and the daughters who bring joy like morning sunshine. May no woman ever feel unseen, unloved, or small, for in God's eyes she is royalty, a foundation, and the heartbeat of every home. If your faith is strong, write, present. If your heart is loyal, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Chapter 6. The Second Wall of Steel. Persistence was only admirable when it wasn't. Harassment disguised as romantic determination by men who confused wealth with worthiness. The glass towers of Manhattan rose around Aldrich's strategic solutions like crystalline monuments to ambition, realized through intelligence and determination. Daphne's corner office occupied the premium real estate of the 42nd floor. Its floor-to-ceiling windows providing commanding views of the city that had witnessed her transformation from abandoned single mother to corporate queen. The space itself communicated power with surgical precision, mahogany furniture that cost more than luxury cars, original artwork that museums coveted, and technology that connected her to global markets where her opinions moved millions of dollars with casual efficiency. 3 days had passed since Celeste Morrison's wedding reception. 72 hours during which Daphne had returned to the comforting routine of building her empire while processing the psychological earthquake that seeing Leif Grosvenor had triggered. She had meetings with Fortune 500 CEOs scheduled throughout the day. Strategic planning sessions that would reshape entire industries, and decisions to make that affected thousands of jobs across multiple continents, which was why the appearance of a security guard at her office door felt like an unwelcome intrusion into the carefully controlled environment she had created to insulate herself from exactly this kind of disruption. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Miss Aldridge," Marcus said, his tone carrying the respectful formality that characterized all interactions in her professional domain. "But there's a Mr. Grosvenor in the lobby with flowers and documents. He's requesting a meeting and refuses to leave. Building security is prepared to remove him if you prefer, but given his profile, we wanted to check with you first." The hesitation in Marcus's voice communicated everything about Leif's current state of desperation. Even security personnel who dealt with corporate disruptions regularly had recognized that this situation required delicate handling. Billionaire CEOs didn't typically appear in lobbies with flowers and desperate expressions unless they were experiencing some form of psychological crisis. "What type of documents?" Daphne asked with the methodical precision that had made her legendary for extracting crucial details from complex situations, her mind already analyzing the tactical implications of his latest approach. "Legal papers, ma'am. Something about custody arrangements and financial trusts. He seems agitated, keeps mentioning his daughter and demanding to speak with you about parental rights." The escalation was both predictable and disappointing, confirming Daphne's assessment that Leif possessed neither the emotional intelligence nor the strategic thinking necessary to approach their situation with appropriate nuance. Instead of learning from his humiliation at the wedding reception, he had apparently decided that legal pressure and financial inducements would succeed where emotional appeals had failed. "Send him up," Daphne said with the kind of cool authority that had intimidated hostile takeover specialists across 3 continents. "And clear my schedule for the next hour. This conversation will require my complete attention." As Marcus retreated to execute her instructions, Daphne turned her attention back to the contract analysis that had been occupying her morning. She was reviewing the terms of a consulting agreement that would expand her European operations when the elevator chimed with arrival notification. She didn't look up from her documents when Leif entered her office, treating his presence with the same casual attention she might give to a delivery service bringing office supplies. "You may set the flowers on the reception table," she said, without raising her eyes from the legal documentation spread across her desk. "The documents can go in the shredder beside the door. I assume you can see yourself out after completing those tasks." The dismissal was calculated to communicate exactly how little his gesture meant to her, how thoroughly his attempt at romantic reconciliation had been categorized as meaningless noise rather than worthy communication. But Leif had apparently prepared himself for resistance, because he remained standing in front of her desk with the kind of desperate determination that suggested he wouldn't be easily discouraged. "Please," he said, his voice carrying the strain of someone operating on the edge of his emotional resources. "Just 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. 5 minutes to explain what happened, to show you that everything has changed, to prove that I deserve a chance to be part of Noelle's life." Finally, Daphne looked up from her contracts with the kind of regal attention that made her simple gestures feel like royal audiences being granted to particularly insignificant subjects. Her expression revealed nothing of whatever thoughts or emotions might be occurring beneath her perfectly controlled surface. She had spent 5 years perfecting this mask of professional composure, learning to weaponize indifference more effectively than other people deployed anger or aggression. 5 minutes, she agreed with Arctic precision, her tone making clear that the time limit was non-negotiable and that exceeding it would result in immediate ejection from her domain. "Speak." Leif had apparently rehearsed his presentation with the same methodical preparation he brought to board meetings and investor pitches, because his words emerged with practiced precision, despite the emotional chaos evident in his expression. He explained the annulment proceedings that had begun the day after the wedding, the legal documentation that would dissolve his marriage to Celeste within weeks rather than months. He described the financial settlements he was prepared to offer, the custody arrangements he hoped to negotiate, the support payments he wanted to establish for their daughter's benefit. "I've prepared trust funds," he continued, producing legal documents with the efficiency of someone accustomed to using paperwork as persuasion. "Educational accounts that will guarantee Noelle access to any university in the world. Investment portfolios that will ensure her financial independence regardless of what happens between us. I want to provide for her in ways that I should have been doing for the past 5 years. The presentation was impressively thorough, covering legal, financial, and practical considerations with the kind of comprehensive planning that had made him successful in business. But Daphne listened with the detached attention of someone evaluating a proposal that held no personal interest, her expression revealing nothing about how his offers might be affecting her decision-making process. His desperation became increasingly apparent as he continued his prepared remarks, each financial inducement more extravagant than the last. Private schools, luxury vacations, investment opportunities, real estate holdings, everything that money could purchase was being offered as compensation for 5 years of absence. The irony was exquisite. A man who had been manipulated through financial vulnerability, now attempting to use financial superiority as manipulation. "I've already spoken with my attorneys about custody arrangements," he said, his voice gaining confidence as he moved into territory where his business acumen felt more applicable. "Given my resources and ability to provide opportunities, most courts would view shared custody as being in Noelle's best interests. I'm prepared to be reasonable about scheduling and logistics." The subtle threat embedded in his legal terminology was unmistakable, designed to communicate that he possessed both the motivation and resources to pursue formal custody proceedings if voluntary cooperation wasn't forthcoming. It was exactly the kind of strategic positioning that had made him successful in corporate negotiations, now deployed in service of personal rather than professional objectives. "Are you finished?" she asked when his prepared remarks reached their conclusion, her voice carrying no more emotional resonance than if he had been delivering weather reports or stock market updates. "I know you have no reason to trust me," Leif continued, apparently interpreting her question as permission to extend his presentation beyond its planned duration. "I know that my actions 5 years ago caused you incredible pain, and that discovering I have a daughter at my wedding to another woman doesn't exactly recommend my judgment or reliability. But I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to prove that I've changed, that I can be the father Noel deserves, and the partner you never had the chance to see me become." The plea was heartfelt, delivered with genuine emotion and obvious sincerity. But Daphne had spent 5 years learning to distinguish between pretty words and meaningful actions, between temporary desperation and genuine transformation. Her response, when it came, carried the kind of surgical precision that had made her legendary for destroying unprepared opponents in corporate negotiations. "I don't care about your annulment," she said with such casual dismissal that the words felt like physical blows. "I don't care about your financial offerings or your belated recognition of parental responsibility. I don't care about your regrets, your explanations, or your sudden awakening to the existence of consequences for your choices." Each statement was delivered with escalating intensity, building toward a conclusion that would leave no ambiguity about her position. Leif's expression grew increasingly desperate as he realized that his carefully prepared presentation was being systematically demolished by someone who possessed immunity to the weapons he had always relied upon. "What I care about," Daphne continued with the kind of measured authority that silenced boardrooms full of aggressive executives, "is that you demonstrated 5 years ago exactly what kind of man you are when faced with difficult choices. You chose comfort over commitment, convenience over love, and easy answers over hard work. That information tells me everything I need to know about your character and your fitness to be around my daughter." The character assassination was comprehensive and devastating, each accusation supported by documented evidence of his past behavior. But it was her next words that transformed dismissal into declaration of war, establishing boundaries that any attempt to cross would result in systematic destruction. "I built this empire while raising our daughter alone," she said, her voice carrying the quiet menace that made corporate titans reconsider hostile takeover attempts. "I survived losing you once, and I discovered in the process that I'm infinitely stronger without you than I ever was with you. Don't underestimate my ability to survive your return, or my determination to protect what I've built from people who think desperation entitles them to access." The threat was unmistakable, and Leif finally began to understand that he was facing an opponent who possessed both the motivation and resources to annihilate his life if he continued pushing against boundaries she had established. This wasn't the vulnerable young woman he had left behind. This was a force of nature who had transformed abandonment into armor and now wielded both with lethal effectiveness. "Security," Daphne said into her desk intercom with casual authority, her tone suggesting that the conversation had reached its predetermined conclusion, regardless of his readiness to accept that reality. "Please escort Mr. Grosvenor to the elevator. If he returns to this building without an appointment, we'll be discussing restraining orders and harassment charges." As security personnel appeared to execute her instructions, Daphne returned her attention to the contract analysis that had been interrupted by his unwelcome presence. She didn't look up as he was escorted from her office, treating his removal with the same casual attention she might give to custodial staff emptying trash bins. The finality of her dismissal left no room for misinterpretation, no opening for future negotiation or appeal. She had communicated with absolute clarity that his presence in her life was not only unwelcome, but actively harmful to the peace and security she had worked so hard to establish. But would his next attempt to breach her defenses prove that some walls were meant to be tested until they revealed their weakest points? Chapter 7. The Third Wall of Fire. The most dangerous predators were those who disguised their hunger for access behind masks of concern for the very children they were determined to disrupt. Brookfield Academy's Autumn Festival transformed the prestigious private school's manicured grounds into a celebration of educational excellence disguised as family entertainment. Parents whose net worth could fund small nations mingled with teachers whose salaries their children's trust funds could cover, creating the kind of carefully orchestrated social environment where future titans of industry received their earliest lessons in power dynamics and social hierarchy. Daphne moved through the festival with Noelle at her side, both of them dressed in casual elegance that communicated their status without requiring obvious displays of wealth. At 5 years old, Noelle had already learned to navigate these complex social environments with the unconscious grace that marked children raised by powerful mothers, charming adults with her intelligence while maintaining the kind of dignified composure that made strangers remember her long after brief encounters. The science booth is next, Noelle announced with the matter-of-fact enthusiasm she reserved for academic challenges, her young mind already calculating the experiments she would encounter at the station, designed for curious kindergarteners. Mrs. Patterson said I could try the first-grade activities if I finished the kindergarten ones quickly enough. I'm sure you will, Daphne replied with the quiet confidence that characterized her interactions with her daughter, a warm pride that contrasted sharply with the Arctic professionalism she deployed in corporate settings. But remember that learning is more important than winning. The festival buzzed with the kind of controlled energy that characterized gatherings of ambitious families. Each interaction carefully managed to communicate exactly the right message about social status, professional achievement, and parental investment in their children's futures. Daphne recognized venture capitalists whose decisions could make or break entire industries, tech innovators whose patents had revolutionized global commerce, and media moguls whose opinions shaped public discourse, which was why the appearance of Leif Grosvenor near the school's main entrance felt like a violation of sacred space, an intrusion into the carefully protected environment where she had built a life free from the complications his presence inevitably created. He had clearly invested significant effort in his appearance for this ambush, trading his usual corporate attire for the kind of casually expensive clothing that suggested relaxed confidence rather than desperate determination. "Miss Aldridge," came a familiar voice from the festival's organizational committee, redirecting her attention back to the social obligations that attendance at such events required. "We're so grateful for your participation in our scholarship fund auction. The signed first edition you donated has already generated tremendous bidding interest." Sandra Williams, Brookfield Academy's development director, approached with the kind of professional warmth that characterized successful fundraisers, her expression radiating the satisfaction of someone who had secured contributions from notoriously difficult donors. The scholarship fund represented one of Daphne's few public charitable commitments, a carefully chosen investment in educational opportunity that aligned with her personal values while providing appropriate tax benefits. Education should be accessible to exceptional minds, regardless of economic circumstances, Daphne replied with genuine conviction, one of the few topics that could penetrate her professional armor to reveal the passionate advocate beneath. Intelligence and determination matter more than inherited privilege, though privilege certainly makes the journey easier. Their conversation continued with the kind of polished professionalism that characterized all interactions in their elevated social sphere, each participant carefully managing their words to communicate precisely the intended message. But Daphne's attention was increasingly divided as she tracked Leif's movement through the crowd, noting how he approached other parents with the casual confidence of someone who belonged in their exclusive environment. "Daddy, look what I made in art class," came a child's voice from nearby, drawing Daphne's focus to a father examining his daughter's ceramic project with exaggerated enthusiasm. The interaction highlighted everything that Noelle had never experienced, the kind of paternal attention that other children took for granted, but that had been completely absent from her daughter's life. "Mom," Noelle said quietly, her voice carrying the perceptive concern that intelligent children exhibited when they sensed tension in the adults around them. "Why does that man keep looking at us? The one by the science booth?" The observation confirmed what Daphne had been tracking peripherally, Leif's systematic approach through the festival crowd as he moved closer to their position with the determined patience of someone executing a carefully planned strategy. His presence at Brookfield Academy represented a significant escalation in his campaign for access, a willingness to intrude into environments specifically chosen for their exclusivity and protection. "Some people have difficulty understanding boundaries," Daphne replied carefully, her voice pitched for her daughter's reassurance, while her mind calculated the tactical implications of this latest violation. "They confuse persistence with dedication and intrusion with legitimate interest." When Leif finally reached their position near the academic competition area, he carried himself with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he had every right to be present at his daughter's school festival. His approach was perfectly calibrated to appear coincidental rather than calculated. The kind of strategic positioning that had made him successful in business negotiations where direct confrontation would have failed. "What a beautiful festival," he said to the general vicinity, his words directed toward the nearest cluster of parents rather than specifically to Daphne, creating the appearance of spontaneous conversation rather than predetermined assault. Brookfield Academy certainly knows how to showcase educational excellence. The comment was designed to establish his familiarity with the institution, while demonstrating appropriate appreciation for its prestige, positioning himself as someone who belonged in their exclusive environment, rather than an intruder attempting to gain unauthorized access. Several parents turned toward the new voice with the automatic curiosity that successful people exhibited when encountering potential networking opportunities. "Are you a Brookfield parent?" asked Jennifer Patterson, whose husband controlled a media empire that influenced global political discourse, her tone carrying the kind of casual inquiry that could quickly transform into social investigation if the response proved unsatisfactory. "I'm hoping to be," Leif replied with practiced sincerity, his gaze shifting meaningfully toward where Noelle stood, examining science experiments with intense concentration. "My daughter attends here, though I've been absent from her life due to complicated circumstances. I'm trying to become more involved in her education and development." The explanation was masterfully crafted to generate sympathy rather than suspicion, positioning him as a reformed father seeking redemption rather than a stranger attempting to gain inappropriate access to children. His tone carried exactly the right mixture of regret and determination to convince casual observers that his intentions were both legitimate and admirable, but Daphne had spent years learning to recognize manipulation disguised as sincerity, and she responded with the kind of surgical precision that had made her legendary for destroying unprepared opponents in corporate settings. Her voice, when she spoke, carried across the immediate area with perfect clarity and unmistakable authority. "This man," she announced to the assembled parents and teachers, her tone combining professional composure with maternal protection in ways that instantly commanded attention, "is attempting to gain unauthorized access to my daughter through false claims about parental writes and fabricated stories about reformed intentions. The accusation hit the gathered crowd like a psychological bomb, instantly transforming the casual social atmosphere into something approaching a security situation. Every parent present understood the implications of unauthorized adult access to their exclusive educational environment, and their collective attention focused on Leif with the kind of suspicious intensity that could destroy reputations permanently. Despite sharing genetic material with my daughter, Daphne continued with escalating authority. This man has no legal custody, no established relationship, and no invitation to be present at school functions. His appearance here today represents harassment disguised as parental concern, manipulation disguised as reformed character. The systematic demolition of his credibility was comprehensive and devastating, each accusation delivered with the kind of documented certainty that made contradictions impossible. Parents who had been prepared to offer networking pleasantries now regarded him with the mixture of suspicion and disgust typically reserved for actual predators. Real fathers. Daphne concluded with the kind of maternal authority that resonated with every parent present, earned their access through years of consistent dedication, not through surprise appearances at school events accompanied by rehearsed explanations about reformed intentions. The moral distinction was absolute and undeniable, supported by the observable evidence of her 5 years raising Noelle alone, while he pursued whatever interests had occupied his attention during their daughter's entire conscious existence. His claims about wanting involvement rang hollow when measured against his complete absence from every important moment in Noelle's young life. Security, Zandra Williams said into her radio, with the kind of professional efficiency that characterized educational administrators accustomed to protecting their students from various threats. "We need an escort to the main gate for an unauthorized individual." As festival security moved to execute her instructions, Leif's carefully constructed performance finally collapsed into the desperate reality beneath his polished exterior. His gaze found Noelle's face with the kind of desperate longing that might have been touching under different circumstances, but which appeared pathetic when filtered through the lens of abandonment and manipulation. "I just wanted to meet her," he said, his voice breaking with emotions he could no longer control, the words emerging as plea rather than explanation. "She's my daughter too." "Biology doesn't create fathers," Daphne replied with Arctic finality as security personnel approached to manage his removal. "Character does, and yours was found wanting 5 years ago when it mattered most." But as Leif was escorted away from the festival grounds, would his next assault on her defenses prove that some men confused rejection with challenge and boundaries with temporary obstacles to be overcome? Chapter 8. The Fourth Wall of Justice. Desperation dressed as philanthropy was still desperation, and public manipulation disguised as reformed. Character remained manipulation regardless of its expensive packaging. The press conference room at the Meridian Hotel buzzed with the kind of controlled energy that characterized gatherings, where serious money intersected with carefully managed public relations. Television cameras lined the back wall like mechanical predators, their lenses focused on the podium where Leif Grosvenor would soon attempt to rehabilitate his public image through the strategic deployment of charitable giving and emotional manipulation. 1 month had passed since his humiliating ejection from Brookfield Academy's autumn festival, 30 days during which his desperation had apparently transformed into the kind of calculated strategy that billionaires deployed when direct approaches failed to achieve desired objectives. The press release announcing his $10 million donation to Children's Future Foundation had generated significant media attention, particularly given the accompanying narrative about reformed fatherhood and second chances. Daphne Aldridge watched the preliminary activities from her own office, 40 floors above the organized chaos. Her attention divided between the live news coverage and the strategic response she had been crafting since learning about Leaf's latest gambit 3 hours earlier. Her team of public relations specialists, legal advisors, and media consultants had assembled with military efficiency to coordinate what would become the most devastating counterattack in modern corporate communication history. "The donation is legitimate," reported Jessica Chen, Daphne's head of media strategy, her voice carrying the kind of professional precision that characterized briefings, where millions of dollars in reputation value hung in the balance. 10 million to Children's Future Foundation, with specific designation for single mother support programs. The optics are obviously designed to generate sympathy and position him as someone who understands the challenges you've faced. "How touching," Daphne replied with the kind of Arctic amusement that made her subordinates grateful they had never experienced her disapproval directly. "He's discovered that charitable giving can be weaponized as emotional blackmail. I'm sure the foundation is thrilled to receive money that comes with such obvious strings attached." The strategy behind Leaf's public philanthropy was transparent to anyone with experience in corporate reputation management. By donating specifically to programs supporting single mothers, he was attempting to demonstrate understanding of Daphne's situation while positioning himself as an ally rather than an adversary. The press conference would undoubtedly include carefully crafted statements about learning from past mistakes, supporting the women who raised children alone, and hoping to make amends for his own failures as a father. He's also arranged for Noelle's name to be included in the program dedication, Jessica continued, her tone suggesting she understood the calculated nature of this particular detail. The foundation will be establishing the Noel Grosvenor Educational Excellence Initiative with his funding. The symbolism is designed to suggest legitimate paternal investment rather than manipulative publicity seeking. The use of their daughter's name represented a particularly sophisticated form of psychological warfare, creating a public association between Leif's philanthropy and Noelle's future that would be difficult to contradict without appearing to oppose beneficial programs for disadvantaged children. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made him successful in business, now deployed in service of personal rather than professional objectives. "Have we confirmed the guest list for his press conference?" Daphne asked, her mind already calculating the tactical implications of various audience compositions and their likely responses to the presentation he had prepared. Tech industry leaders, foundation board members, and select media representatives, came the immediate response from Michael Rodriguez, her director of corporate intelligence, whose job involved monitoring potential threats to her business interests. Notable attendees include Patricia Morrison from Venture Capital Dynamics, Stephen Chen from Innovation Partners, and Margaret Whitmore from Whitmore Foundation, all people who could influence public opinion about his character and motivations. The guest list revealed the sophistication of Leif's approach, carefully selecting witnesses whose approval would carry significant weight in the overlapping circles of technology, finance, and philanthropy. These weren't random media representatives or casual observers. They were people whose opinions shaped industry discourse, and whose support could legitimize his narrative about reformed character and genuine remorse. "Time to provide some balance to his carefully orchestrated performance," Daphne said, with the kind of calm determination that had intimidated hostile takeover specialists across 3 continents. "Schedule our own press conference for 30 minutes after his concludes. I want the response to hit while his narrative is still fresh in everyone's minds." The counterattack had been planned with military precision, designed to neutralize his philanthropic gesture by exposing the manipulation beneath its charitable facade. Daphne had spent the morning reviewing footage from his previous public appearances. identifying inconsistencies in his statements about fatherhood and analyzing the calculated nature of his recent behavioral changes. Her preparation was exhaustive, covering every possible angle of attack while maintaining the kind of professional composure that would make her systematic destruction of his credibility appear measured rather than vindictive. She understood that public opinion battles were won through careful presentation of facts rather than emotional appeals, and she possessed both the documentation and the rhetorical skills necessary to demolish his reputation permanently. 40 minutes later, she stood before her own carefully selected audience of media representatives, industry analysts, and legal experts. Her presence commanding the kind of immediate attention that powerful women inspired when they chose to deploy their full authority in public settings. The room fell silent as she approached the podium, recognizing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in the normally polite world of corporate public relations. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began with the kind of measured authority that made every word feel like royal proclamation, "I'm here to address the charitable theater performance you witnessed earlier today, where a man attempted to purchase moral rehabilitation through strategic philanthropy and emotional manipulation." The opening salvo was delivered with surgical precision, immediately reframing Leaf's donation from generous gesture to calculated manipulation. Her tone carried no anger or emotion, just the cold certainty of someone presenting documented facts that could not be disputed or explained away. Mr. Grosvenor's use of charitable giving as emotional blackmail demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of both genuine philanthropy and authentic parental responsibility, she continued, her voice carrying across the room with perfect clarity. Real fathers don't abandon their children and then expect public sympathy when consequences finally catch up with their choices. The systematic demolition of his narrative was comprehensive and devastating, each point supported by verifiable facts about his absence from Noel's life and his recent pattern of increasingly desperate attempts to gain access through manipulation rather than earn trust. She presented timeline documentation, legal records, and witness statements that painted a picture of strategic abandonment, followed by calculated attempts at forced reconciliation. "My daughter is not a publicity opportunity for a man experiencing buyer's remorse about his life choices," Daphne declared with the kind of maternal authority that resonated with every parent in the audience. "She is not a prop in his public relations campaign to rehabilitate a reputation damaged by 5 years of voluntary absence from her life." The distinction between genuine parental concern and manipulative public relations was drawn with absolute clarity, supported by the observable evidence of his complete absence from every meaningful moment in Noel's existence. His sudden interest in fatherhood coincided suspiciously with his need for positive publicity, following his disastrous wedding and subsequent business complications. Her presentation continued with devastating efficiency, methodically destroying every aspect of his charitable gesture, while maintaining the kind of professional composure that made her accusations appear measured rather than vindictive. She revealed the calculated timing of his donation, the strategic selection of beneficiaries designed to generate maximum sympathy, and the obvious attempt to use public pressure as leverage in their private dispute. "Real philanthropy," she continued with escalating intensity, "serves the needs of recipients rather than the psychological requirements of donors. Authentic charitable giving doesn't come with press conferences, naming opportunities, or calculated timing designed to influence personal disputes." The moral authority behind her words was unassailable, backed by years of quiet, charitable giving that had never sought publicity or recognition. Her own donations to educational and children's programs had been consistently anonymous, motivated by genuine concern for social welfare rather than reputation management or emotional manipulation. "Furthermore," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from delivering a perfectly executed strategic strike. Children's Future Foundation has announced they will be returning Mr. Grosvenor's donation within 48 hours. They recognize that accepting money with such obvious strings attached would compromise their mission and damage their reputation among legitimate donors who support their work without hidden agendas. The revelation that his donation was being rejected hit the media audience like a psychological bomb, instantly transforming his philanthropic gesture from generous offering to public humiliation. Foundation officials had apparently reached the same conclusion about his motivations that any objective observer would draw, recognizing that association with his manipulation would damage their credibility permanently. The Foundation's rejection had been secured through Daphne's own strategic intervention, leveraging her extensive network of philanthropic contacts to ensure that Leif's attempt at reputation rehabilitation would backfire spectacularly. Her influence in charitable circles was considerable, built through years of genuine commitment to causes she supported, and she had deployed that influence with devastating effectiveness. As questions erupted from the assembled media representatives, each one designed to explore different aspects of the systematic destruction they had just witnessed, Daphne fielded responses with the kind of professional composure that had made her legendary in corporate settings, where weakness meant annihilation. Her answers were precise, documented, and devastating to any remaining credibility Leif might have possessed. "The Foundation's decision speaks for itself," she replied to a particularly aggressive inquiry about the rejected donation. "Organizations that depend on public trust cannot afford association with donors whose motivations are transparently self-serving, rather than genuinely charitable." The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with Daphne systematically dismantling every aspect of Leif's public narrative, while maintaining the kind of regal composure that made her appear magnanimous rather than vindictive. By the time she concluded her remarks and left the podium, his reputation had been so thoroughly destroyed that his business relationships would suffer for years. 30 minutes later, as she returned to her office, Daphne felt the cold satisfaction of a woman who had just delivered a masterclass in strategic warfare. Leif Grosvenor's attempt to purchase redemption through public philanthropy had not only failed, it had backfired so spectacularly that his reputation might never recover from the damage. But would the complete destruction of his public credibility finally teach him that some walls were meant to protect rather than be conquered? Or would it drive him to even more desperate measures? Chapter 9. The Silence That Spoke Volumes. Sometimes the most powerful message was the absence of any message at all, when silence became the loudest form of communication, and strategic withdrawal spoke more clearly than any words. The weeks following Leif Grosvenor's public humiliation passed with a quiet that felt almost supernatural after months of his increasingly desperate attempts to breach the walls Daphne had constructed around her life. October melted into November with the kind of crisp beauty that made Manhattan feel like a city designed for people sophisticated enough to appreciate subtle seasonal changes. And for the first time in months, Daphne could focus entirely on the empire she had built without constant vigilance against unwanted intrusions. Her mornings returned to their familiar rhythm of strategic planning, international conference calls, and the kind of high-stakes decision-making that affected thousands of jobs across multiple continents. Aldridge Strategic Solutions had secured 3 major consulting contracts during the period when Leif's disruptions had demanded her attention, proving that nothing could truly diminish her professional effectiveness when she chose to deploy her full capabilities. "The European expansion is proceeding ahead of schedule," reported David Chen during their weekly operational review, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose projections had been exceeded by actual performance. The London office is already generating revenue that surpasses our most optimistic first-year targets, and the preliminary inquiries from Frankfurt suggest we'll need to accelerate our German market entry timeline. Success has a way of creating its own momentum, Daphne replied, with the quiet confidence that characterized her approach to business growth. Her attention divided between the quarterly reports spread across her desk and the Manhattan skyline visible through her office windows. Excellence attracts clients who recognize quality when they encounter it. The absence of Leaf's harassment had allowed her to remember why she enjoyed the work that had elevated her from struggling single mother to corporate royalty. Strategic consulting required the kind of analytical intelligence that she possessed in abundance, combined with the psychological insight necessary to understand how human nature influenced business decisions. Each successful project reinforced her reputation while building the financial foundation that guaranteed Noelle's future regardless of whatever chaos might emerge from other aspects of their lives. Noelle's own routine had stabilized as well, her academic performance at Brookfield Academy continuing to astonish teachers who thought they had seen every possible variation of intellectual giftedness. Her mathematics instructor had requested permission to advance her to first-grade coursework, while her literature teacher suggested that she might benefit from independent reading projects designed for students older than her chronological age. Mrs. Patterson says I can start bigger number problems next semester if I want, Noelle announced during their evening homework session, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact enthusiasm she reserved for academic challenges that interested her. She thinks I might be ready for harder math by the time I'm 6. What do you think? Daphne asked, genuinely curious about her daughter's perspective on educational acceleration, rather than automatically accepting adult recommendations about appropriate pacing. Do you enjoy mathematics enough to spend more time studying it, or would you prefer to explore other subjects as well? The question reflected Daphne's commitment to raising a child who understood that intellectual gifts came with choices about how to deploy them most effectively. Unlike parents who push their children toward predetermined definitions of success, she wanted Noelle to develop the confidence necessary to make independent decisions about her own educational and professional future. I like solving problems, Noelle replied after considering the question with the kind of thoughtful deliberation that marked her as exceptional among her peers. But I also like reading stories and learning about different countries and understanding how things work. Maybe I could do mathematics faster, so I have more time for other interesting things. The response demonstrated exactly the kind of balanced perspective that would serve her well throughout life, recognizing that intellectual advancement should create opportunities rather than limitations. Her natural wisdom about pacing and priority suggested that she had inherited more than just intelligence from her genetic contributors. She possessed the emotional intelligence necessary to manage giftedness without becoming isolated by it. As autumn progressed toward winter, Daphne began to notice subtle changes in the industry conversations that occurred at the high-level networking events she attended regularly. Leif Grosvenor's name appeared less frequently in discussions about technological innovation, and when it did surface, the context often involved speculation about his business judgment rather than celebration of his achievements. I heard Grosvenor lost the Morrison Industries contract, mentioned Patricia Williams, during a charity gala where tech industry leaders mingled with philanthropic organizations seeking funding. Apparently, his public relations disasters affected their confidence in his professional decision-making abilities. Personal chaos has a way of contaminating business relationships, replied Stephen Chen, whose venture capital firm had invested heavily in several of Leif's competitors. Investors get nervous when executives demonstrate poor judgment in their private lives, especially when it becomes public knowledge through media coverage. The conversations revealed the professional cost of his failed campaign for personal redemption. demonstrating how reputation damage in one sphere could metastasize into other areas where credibility mattered enormously. His systematic humiliation had apparently convinced potential clients that someone who made such spectacularly poor personal decisions might not be the ideal choice for strategic business partnerships. Daphne listened to these industry assessments with the detached interest of someone observing natural consequences play out according to predictable patterns. She had never actively campaigned to damage his business relationships. That destruction had occurred organically as a result of his own choices and their very public failures. The market had simply concluded that his judgment was questionable based on observable evidence. But beneath her professional satisfaction at watching justice serve itself, Daphne found herself experiencing something she hadn't expected, a kind of melancholy recognition that their story might truly be over. The complete absence of contact attempts, media stunts, or desperate gestures suggested that he had finally accepted defeat and withdrawn from the battlefield entirely. After months of constant vigilance against his various forms of intrusion, the silence felt almost anticlimactic. "Do you ever wonder about your father?" she asked Noel one evening as they reviewed homework together, the question emerging from contemplations she had been processing privately for weeks. "Sometimes," Noel replied, with the kind of honest directness that characterized all her communications. Her attention focused on age-appropriate reading exercises that challenged her developing skills. "But I think wondering about people who aren't part of your life is like wondering about countries you've never visited. It might be interesting, but it doesn't change anything about where you actually live." The wisdom embedded in her response suggested that Noel had processed their situation with the kind of practical intelligence that would serve her well throughout life. She understood, perhaps better than many adults, that emotional energy invested in unavailable relationships was ultimately wasted effort that could be better deployed in nurturing connections that actually existed. December arrived, with the kind of crisp elegance that made Manhattan feel like a city designed for people sophisticated enough to appreciate winter beauty, and Daphne realized with surprise that she had stopped thinking about Leif Grosvenor entirely during her daily routines. His absence had become so complete that she no longer automatically scanned crowds for familiar faces or monitored news coverage for mentions of his activities. The silence had taught her something important about the difference between victory and peace. Defeating his various attempts at forced reconciliation had been satisfying, but the tranquility that followed his complete withdrawal felt like something approaching genuine healing. For the first time in 5 years, she could consider their shared past without anger, hurt, or defensive calculations about protecting herself from future attacks. But even as she embraced the calm that his departure had created, Daphne remained aware that some silences were temporary strategic withdrawals rather than permanent surrenders. The absence of contact might indicate genuine acceptance of her boundaries, or it might simply reflect a more sophisticated approach to eventual renewed contact. Only time would reveal whether his silence represented true understanding of consequences, or merely the calm before a storm that had been gathering strength during the quiet months of apparent surrender. Chapter 10. The Queen's Final Verdict. True, power lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to recognize when destruction had served its purpose and when mercy might accomplish what warfare could not. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered through Daphne's attorney rather than directly to her office. Its very method of transmission communicating respect for the boundaries she had established, rather than another attempt to circumvent her defenses. 6 months had passed since Leif Grosvenor's last desperate public gesture, half a year of blessed silence that had allowed her life to return to the rhythms of success and satisfaction she had worked so hard to create. Margaret Stevens, Daphne's longtime legal counsel, presented the correspondence with the kind of professional neutrality that characterized communication about potentially sensitive matters, her expression revealing nothing about her personal opinion of its contents or significance. Mr. Grosvenor's attorney requested that I review this before forwarding it to you, she explained as she placed the sealed envelope on Daphne's desk with careful precision. I can confirm that it contains no legal demands, financial proposals, or attempts at manipulation. It appears to be a genuine personal communication with no strings attached. The endorsement carried considerable weight, coming from someone whose job involved protecting Daphne from various forms of legal and emotional harassment. Margaret had reviewed enough correspondence from desperate individuals to recognize the difference between strategic manipulation and authentic communication, making her assessment particularly valuable in determining whether this latest contact deserved serious consideration. Daphne studied the envelope for several moments before opening it, noting the quality of the paper and the careful attention to formal presentation. Even the handwriting on the address suggested someone who had taken considerable time to craft each letter perfectly, approaching the communication with the kind of methodical respect that had been absent from his previous attempts at contact. The letter itself was surprisingly brief, occupying less than a full page with script that managed to be both elegant and humble, each word chosen with the precision that successful people brought to important communications. No flowery language, no dramatic declarations, no attempts to manipulate through emotional appeals or financial inducements. Daphne, it began simply, her name written with the kind of careful respect typically reserved for formal business correspondence rather than intimate personal communication. The tone was immediately different from his previous desperate pleas, carrying a gravity that suggested genuine transformation rather than strategic presentation. I understand now why you rejected every attempt I made to force my way back into your life and Noelle's. The past 6 months of silence have taught me lessons that years of success never could. About the difference between wanting something and deserving it, between demanding access and earning trust. The acknowledgement was comprehensive and unqualified, demonstrating understanding that extended beyond surface recognition of tactical failures to genuine comprehension of the character flaws that had created those failures. He wasn't simply admitting that his approach had been wrong. He was recognizing that his fundamental assumptions about relationships and responsibility had been flawed. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter continued, with the kind of unflinching honesty that required genuine courage to express. I don't expect a second chance or any form of relationship with either of you. I simply want you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I lost through my own choices, and that I respect your decision to protect the life you've built from someone who proved himself unworthy of inclusion. The absence of requests or demands was perhaps the most significant aspect of his communication, suggesting that he had finally learned to distinguish between genuine respect and strategic deference designed to achieve specific objectives. This wasn't a negotiation or an attempt at persuasion. It was an acknowledgement of reality and an expression of understanding about consequences. The work I've been doing at the Center for Single Mothers has taught me things about sacrifice and strength that I never understood when it might have mattered, he wrote, revealing the kind of specific commitment that suggested authentic engagement rather than public relations gesture. Watching women rebuild their lives after abandonment has shown me exactly what you accomplished while I was pursuing distractions that seemed important at the time. The reference to volunteer work was mentioned without fanfare or emphasis, suggesting that his involvement was motivated by genuine desire to understand rather than calculated attempt to demonstrate reformed character. Real transformation often manifested through quiet service rather than public declarations, and his approach suggested that he might finally be learning that distinction. I want Noelle to know that her father's absence was never her fault. that she possesses everything necessary to conquer whatever world she chooses to enter, and that somewhere there exists a man who is proud of her achievements, even though he has no right to claim credit for them. The message for their daughter was crafted with the kind of careful consideration that recognized her intelligence while respecting Daphne's role as primary protector of Noelle's emotional well-being. He wasn't requesting access or demanding acknowledgement. He was simply offering assurance that their daughter's worth wasn't diminished by his failures. Thank you for protecting her from my mistakes and for raising someone extraordinary despite the obstacles I created. I hope someday she might understand that being abandoned by her father says nothing about her value and everything about his character. The letter concluded with a simple signature. No additional requests for response or future communication. The overall tone suggested genuine acceptance of their situation rather than strategic positioning for future appeals, creating the impression that this might represent actual closure rather than another manipulation disguised as surrender. Daphne read the communication twice before setting it aside, her analytical mind processing both the content and the context, while her emotions remained carefully controlled. 6 months of silence had indeed taught her important lessons about the difference between victory and peace, between destroying an opponent and achieving genuine resolution of conflict. "Mummy," Noelle said from her position near the office windows where she had been working on homework while waiting for their evening plans to begin. "You look thoughtful. Is everything okay?" The question drew Daphne's attention back to the present moment and the child who had been the center of her universe for 5 years, whose happiness and security had motivated every strategic decision she had made about protecting their life from unwanted disruptions. Looking at Noelle now, confident, brilliant, emotionally secure, despite growing up without a father, Daphne felt profound satisfaction about the choices she had made. "Everything is more than okay," she replied with genuine warmth, recognizing that their life had indeed become everything she had hoped to create when she first decided to build an empire strong enough to protect them both. "I was just thinking about how much we've accomplished together and how proud I am of the person you're becoming." The letter remained on her desk as they gathered their materials for the evening's activities, but its presence felt less intrusive than she might have expected. Perhaps because it demanded nothing, requested nothing, and seemed to understand that some bridges once burned were meant to stay destroyed. Or perhaps because time and success had given her the perspective necessary to distinguish between threats that required defensive action and communications that could be acknowledged without compromising the security she had worked so hard to establish. As they left the office building together, Daphne realized that the strongest queens weren't necessarily those who never showed mercy, but those who possessed enough confidence in their own power to choose when mercy served justice better than continued warfare. The letter would remain in her desk drawer, not answered, but not discarded either, a reminder that some walls existed not to keep people out forever, but to ensure that only those who had genuinely earned the right to approach could ever hope to pass through. The future stretched before them, filled with possibilities that had nothing to do with the past they had survived, and everything to do with the empire they would continue building together, mother and daughter. Queens of a kingdom founded on strength, intelligence, and the kind of love that could withstand any siege time might bring against their carefully constructed happiness. And in the end, the greatest love stories weren't always about reunion. Sometimes they were about having the wisdom to know when letting go was the most loving act of all.